everybody, and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore, and Scott is not on vacation. He's actually at work this week, so I'm flying solo hosting. However, I'm joined in our studio by two wonderful guests. Oklahoma City Councilman James Cooper. Hello, sir.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And also a good friend of mine, David White. How are you, sir?
I'm great, Andy. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for coming. So this week is Pride Week, as proclaimed by Mayor Holt for the first time ever. Certainly a monumental, occasion in the history of Oklahoma City. And we thought it might be interesting to have a conversation about, we'll call it the politics of pride. Not just about the event, but the relationship between the LGBT community and themselves and politics and what it's like for a couple of folks who are members of the community to what their kind of journey and experience has been like. So I just told them a few minutes ago I've not formed a proper outline for this episode, so we're just going to wing it and see how it goes. So I'll let both of our guests introduce themselves. James, would you like to go first and tell us a little bit about yourself and how your journey of getting involved in politics in general?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I serve as Ward 2's representation on City Council. I am on a leave of absence for the next year from teaching middle school on the south side of our city at Jefferson Middle School, where I was teaching college preparation and creative writing. I'll be returning to the adjunct classroom teaching film and philosophy and English at UCO and OCU, respectively. And I got involved in politics because, it wasn't the plan, but when I was 17, Columbine happened. And a lot of people, Hillary Clinton or John McCain, both parties blamed Marilyn Manson and The Matrix and Biggie and Tupac and punk and horror movies, Doom, the video game. And I'd grown up on all of that. The first movies I ever remember seeing as a 5-year-old were like Nightmare on Elm Street 3. And I had older half siblings. And Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And all those movies did for me was make me want to study them and write my own. I'm 37. I still haven't been in a fight. So I really did not like this argument. So I spent the rest of all of my adult life, the last 18 years in film studies, political science, and then my master's degrees, studying the representation of media violence, the history of violence in society and civilization. And spoiler, I learned that it was not Mortal Kombat or Freddy Krueger, but it was broken people, broken families, broken neighborhoods, left behind part of towns. And it turns out we had been, scapegoating these things all along. And so, I'd always wanted to do an academic book talking about media violence. And I realized, well, maybe only other academics would read that. And that's if NPR's like, read that. So I said, you know what? I think this needs to be a bigger conversation. So why don't I run for city council, which is where you can tend to those left behind, underrepresented parts of town and take the research I've done to the council. And so that's how I ended up here. It's not the typical pathway I'm learning for someone to sit in elected office, but
sure. I'm not convinced there is a typical pathway anymore for sure. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
David, how about you?
I am president of government relations at Alexander Companies, which is a contract lobbying firm. And I started in politics at 17. I was a page in the legislature, just kind of trying to build my resume, and ended up falling in love with the legislative process. And so all through college, I interned and did everything that a young, nerdy politico would do. Mm-hmm. And then worked on House staff for a while, and then ended up at the Oklahoma AIDS Care Fund for about a year and a half, and then left and began doing contract work. Still lucky enough to be able to represent the AIDS Care Fund at the Capitol and in the community, which is a good way to kind of stay connected to the community, the LGBTQ community, because while HIV is not a gay disease necessarily. It still disproportionately affects members of our community. So it's a good way that I can take kind of the years of political experience and still be beneficial to the community, I hope.
Sure. And I didn't say this up front, but James is a Democrat, although your office is nonpartisan. But I think everyone knows. Sure, the secret's out.
Yeah.
And David, you're a Republican, as far as I know, unless you've changed.
Yeah,
since
no,
we
not at all.
Had a conversation. And so we've talked a lot on this show this year about our HIV bill, and so David, I kind of want to go back to you because you gave a really great summary of kind of what happened and where we're at with that bill to the AIDS Care Fund board the other night. And so maybe kind of give us a quick recap for listeners about how that came to be and where it ended up.
Yeah. So we've been working on this for 3 years, and this year we were pretty successful in the legislature. Representative Marcus McIntyre and Senator Adam Pugh did a great job getting it through both the House and the Senate and to the governor's desk. Unfortunately, the governor vetoed the bill, citing that the current statute allows the Department of Health and the Department of Education to update the instructional material as scientific advances and medical advances happen. So he suggested, instead of changing the statute, that we change the administrative rule. So we're working with the Department of Education in kind of consultation with the Department of Health to hopefully get the bill's language just moved into the rulemaking process, and we can have that adopted by probably the 2020-2021 school year.
Okay.
So the rulemaking process is very long, which is frustrating, but it's good because it has lots of public comment and the opportunity, but it just has to go through so many steps that it won't be able to be rolled out really until one more school year.
So we'll spend the next year working on that,
Yes.
and then it would be in place. I'll be honest, like coming into this, the last few years, I didn't know that there was any kind of administrative rulemaking process, and I'm not entirely sure I know what that even means, aside from my hunch is it's committees deciding on some rules and someone passes it and it's in effect. So tell me a little bit about that.
So I was actually lucky enough when T.W. Shannon was speaker, I worked for the Administrative Rules Committee. And so I'm too familiar with the process, having to read every administrative rule that year. So essentially the legislature passes a statute change, and then it's up to the agency most of the time to interpret what that means. And so the administrative rule is how an agency, a board, or a commission interprets a statutory change or rule. And so it's their internal process for how they'll implement statute.
Okay, so like the law passes and they're like, okay, this is how we read the law. This is what it means for us.
Yes. So then the governing board of the agency, board, or commission will then create a rule. Their attorneys will create a rule, and then it has to go through public comment, and then the governing board will vote on whether they approve or disapprove the rule, and then it has to be submitted to the legislature. The legislature then reads the rules and approves them, and then sends a resolution to the governor. So they typically do it in one omnibus bill now.
Right.
And so this year we saw, I believe it was just the Ethics Commission and Wildlife had two rules that they didn't approve in their resolution.
Interesting. So, man, I'm learning stuff right here. So the legislature passes the laws for, let's say, the Department of Education, whatever pertains to them. The Department of Ed says, okay, we see the laws and we interpret those to mean this. So here's our rules based on that understanding. And then they reflect back to the legislature, is that correct? And the legislature says, yes, that's correct, or no, it's not. And then it's, that's the rules.
So an administrative rule carries the force and effect of statute, but isn't statute. So it has kind of a different process, but it still is the law. So, a lot of times you may see one of the things that comes back to me maybe is like DHS, for instance. The legislature may put in laws that affect them, but then DHS determines in what situations they actually will remove a child from a home or something. So
Right.
they're interpreting
Right.
that.
Their
and
policies
it's
and
their
procedures,
policies.
yeah.
But in order, just like with any organization, if you have policies and procedures, they need to be approved, written down, and not just kind of fly by the seat of your pants.
Right.
But particularly when it's government.
That's so I had dabbled in nonprofits and board work until just a few years ago, and then I've had a very deep crash course in it. And David, you will appreciate this. So I serve on the Oklahoma HIV and AIDS, or HIV and Hepatitis Planning Council. And so Amy, our colleague there, emailed me today and said, "Didn't we change the bylaws to allow 30 members instead of 25?" And so I had to go back through all of my minutes and notes. I said, "No, we've all I have is 25, and the last reference was like in 2017, and so now we've got to start the process of go back and figure out, okay, well, if we want to change that, how do we change that, and how much notice do we need to have, and so that we don't just fly by the seat of our pants and change it for our next meeting." So stay tuned for that if you attend that meeting.
I'll be there.
James, I saw on social media this morning that you were painting a street, a big rainbow flag in the middle of 39th Street in anticipation of Pride activities this weekend. This is the 50th year or 50th anniversary of Stonewall. Tell us a little bit about that and what that means to you this year.
Yeah, so we it is the 50th anniversary, and when I took office, a few of the local news channels reached out to me and wanted to sit with me and talk about the significance historically of my election. And I mentioned during an interview, I think at least a couple times, that because there's this notion that I hate, identity politics they call it. And I had noticed as I took office, there were some people, you never read the comments, but I wanted to read, I never read comments, but I wanted to see how far we had or had not come in regards to LGBT acceptance, especially as it related to my being in office, because I needed to know where people were at so I would know how to have conversations with them about this topic. And there were people who were, overwhelming support. Let's just start there. Overwhelming support. When you look at the likes and the loves, it's just overwhelming. It's not even close. And then when you dig down and you start looking at who the people are who are like, there were a lot of people who were like, well, I hope that wasn't the whole point of his campaign. And it's like, well, we have receipts.
Right.
Look at, just our campaign was about, walkable neighborhoods and connecting kids to parks with recreation and youth centers and reliable public transportation and affordable housing. And, that just was not our campaign. And so when I then went on to one of the local channels a week later, and this question came up again, someone had literally messaged in that particular question: why does it matter? And I responded back. I was like, well, when I was in 9th grade and I came out of the closet, which was 1996, the Birdcage, first time I'd really seen an LGBT character in a film, it was still illegal in Oklahoma to essentially be on a date and or in a relationship with someone of the same sex. Consenting adults, illegal. And that would not change until the Supreme Court until 2003, the Lawrence case. And, when Stonewall 50 years ago happens in 1969, 2 years later in 1971, when I believe it's the American Psychiatric Association removes homosexuality.
Right.
What a silly phrase.
I like that you leaned in with a deep voice for that, right?
Just, a term that doesn't even come into existence until the 1800s, right? Yeah. So it's just such a strange thing. A naming of something that's been done since the beginning of existence, right? So when they removed that from their list of mental illnesses in 1971, it was illegal in every state but Illinois to be openly LGBT. Every state but one.
Why Illinois? Do you know?
That's a great question. I don't know. Google that, somebody listening. So I mentioned this just as fact, and I went back and I looked because someone had tagged me. I think one of the reporters tagged me, and I looked at the comments again. And do you know there were many people, again, overwhelming acceptance. But some of these commenters were like, it was never illegal. And I'm just thinking, in the time it took that person to make that comment, they could have easily Googled homosexuality illegal in Oklahoma and found all the receipts they needed of evidence. But they wouldn't. And so the significance to me of this being the 50th anniversary of Stonewall is that it is really time that we all acknowledge what is unfortunately a not so pretty history. And that history is one where, you know, here in Oklahoma, the same year as Stonewall, you know, there was a young man named Paul Thompson. He was a lawyer. He was arrested by an undercover police officer for simply kissing his friends on the cheek at a beer bar, spent the night in jail. And it was common at the time that when you were arrested, the state paper would print your home address, your employment. And what kind of violence is that inviting to your home? Will you be able to keep your job? Mm-hmm. This is what we talk about when we talk about the closet. This is why people were forced into something called the closet. They could not be out. They could not be themselves. It is not identity politics then to thusly own all the parts of our identity and to acknowledge that there has been an extensive, systematic history by law of literally discriminating against people. 10 years in prison were Oklahoma statutes. 10 years in prison for loving someone in a consensual relationship. 10 years in prison. And quite frankly, that was if you were lucky, if you weren't getting beat up on the streets, and often by the cops. So this morning, we just thought, what if we put a flag that recognizes the history of people who were victimized, but said, we are not just survivors, but we will thrive. We're not wallowing in victimhood. We are acknowledging ugly truths and acknowledging how from that first Stonewall riot where they pushed back against decades of police brutality, decades of discrimination by losing your job, violence on the streets, we as an LGBTQ people said enough is enough, and we are proud of who we are. And that's why that word pride is so significant. And so we thought, let's for the first time in our history in Oklahoma City put the rainbow flag right there, and let's have it include trans folk. There's color for that. Black and brown people. And again, that's not identity politics either, because when Stonewall happened, I have learned, unfortunately, a lot of gay white men turned their back on lesbians. They were just as sexist as their straight male counterparts, these guys. They turned their backs on black and brown queer people. The women, a lot of white lesbians did the same to black and brown lesbians. And so this morning to see youth, LGBT youth out there with me and Ali Shin, the executive director of Freedom Oklahoma, Chris Williams of Q Space, who works with a lot of LGBT youth, to see us out there bright and early, putting that flag in the heart of our city's LGBT district, where police used to brutalize people until Engels sued in 1982 and won their lawsuit and made it where the police can never come over there again unless they are called to serve and protect. To have that flag there, it was a really beautiful thing, and to see those kids participating and having a safe space to do so. And in concluding on that, why it was so significant what we did this morning, it's not for me. That flag this morning was not for me. It is for the fact that of our homeless youth in this city, and I think I saw you at maybe the state of the homelessness.
Yeah,
I think they say probably 3,000 to 5,000 unsheltered people in our city right now. But of our youth, 40% of them are LGBTQ, and within 24 hours of them being on the street, they will be approached by a sex worker, sex trafficker, or someone getting them to do drugs. Our kids are in danger. And I'm not being hyperbolic. They are in danger, and it is up to us to give them a safe, welcoming environment. And it's time we start acknowledging some truths, even though there might be some people who don't want to acknowledge those truths.
Sure. So it strikes me, James, that you kind of ended that speaking about youth, and you both said that you got involved in politics around the age of 17, which is certainly the age of a lot of the kids that are involved with the Q space. And so I think, James, what you were saying is that you are you were actively creating a different environment for 17-year-olds who may be just now, on the cusp of being able to vote and maybe thinking about politics, although these days it feels like everybody, even my 7-year-old son, will make comments about politics, and he doesn't, obviously can't vote, and so I think that sounds like it was, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but a powerful experience for you to connect with something in your own past and say, I am doing this for the next generation to do what I can to make it very different for them.
That's right. The last 4 years of teaching middle school at Jefferson on the South Side, I've been replaying in my head the fact that the first film I remember seeing is Nightmare on Elm Street 3, and in that film, the main girl, the final girl, Nancy, who survived the first film, she's now just finished grad school, and she goes to this mental institution where the last of the Elm Street kids are alive, and their parents don't. Get ready for this. Get ready for the connecting of the dots here. Their parents don't believe them that Freddy is trying to kill them in their dreams. Instead, the parents are telling these kids that it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, that's why they're dying, and that they're committing suicide. And then finally, halfway through the film, when Nancy arrives, and the kids don't believe, they don't listen to any of the adults. And when she finally says, I know who's trying to kill you, they're like, don't mess with us, we're not in the mood. And she goes, he wears a dirty brown hat, and he has a striped sweater. And they buck up, because all of a sudden they're like, wait a second. She's listening to us. She's with us. And I have to tell you, I have felt a version. I don't know if it was just wired into my synapses since I saw that film as a kid, that I think it is my job. I think it is our job as adults to take our experiences, to learn from our experiences, to reflect on them, and to make things better for this next generation. We're only here for a brief amount of time.
Sure. I did not know that Nightmare on Elm Street 3 had such a deep social commentary to it.
Wes Craven, the director and writer of 1 and 2, or 1 and 3 rather, he was a philosophy professor.
Yeah, he's got some of his other stuff I'm aware of is smart. I didn't know he did 1 and 3. Again, this is somewhat lighthearted, but in my opinion, I think many times in movies and TV shows, sequels end up being more like that movie Multiplicity, where each one gets a little dumber.
Not good.
Yeah. So I'm glad to hear that, especially for you, this was not the case. Yeah. David, to go back to you, what, as a Republican, I think most people would say, wait a second, there are gay Republicans, and may not know that that's even the case. What can you tell us, or what do you feel comfortable sharing about your experience living in both those worlds?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time trying to be that good Republican kid with the perfect come over and the very boring blue suit with the red tie, and there just kind of came a point that I would notice. I've met a lot of guys at young Republican events across the country, and it was just there were a lot of us out there, but we don't really we're not as accepted within our party. But then if members of our community find out we're Republicans, then they also kind of don't really want to accept that part of us either, because there's this mentality that how could you do this when Republicans are consistently attacking our communities? And that is true, but there are many of us in Oklahoma that have been working within the party to get that to change, because the fundamental parts of the Republican Party have nothing to do with this issue. Unfortunately, the evangelical right came in and kind of took over, and so then this became a wedge issue. But really, if you talk to just an average Republican voter, this isn't going to be on their top 10 issues. Now, there are always going to be some people that the gays are trying to run the world, and there's not a lot you can do about that. But if you look at some of our leadership, Labor Commissioner Leslie Osborne, great ally, and I would think if you look at her voting record, a great Republican too. And so there's a lot of work that we need to do within the Republican Party to make this not an issue anymore. The Supreme Court's ruled on marriage equality, and that was their big thing, is they're trying to destroy our families. Well, now they're moving to they're going to attack our kids in the bathroom and all of these other ridiculous things. So we have to continue to work on that, but we also have to work within our party and say it's okay to be gay and a Republican, or to be trans and a Republican. We've done a really good job, I think, in the last several years of realizing, James mentioned this earlier, a lot of the LGBTQ leadership and stuff tried to be your cis white guys. And we've done a good job of getting people of color, people of a trans experience involved in leadership, involved in discussions. And we need to just ensure that we're not alienating folks for political ideology, because I don't think any gay Republican is going to agree with some of those stances on those issues. But I think when you come to taxes or to national defense and things like that, you're going to more align with Republican ideology. So I think both sides have a lot of work to do. We recently reconstituted the log cabin Republicans in Oklahoma to really try to work with party leadership and say, give us a seat at the table.
Yeah.
Let us talk, because, I think I was terrified to come out to my family, and my stepdad said, about time. He knew the whole time. I was terrified. But you didn't know that he was that welcoming. And when I came out in my fraternity in college, a lot of them really were just confused, because they were like, if we would have known you were gay, we would have treated you differently. But now that we know you and you're gay, it's okay. We had never given a gay person the opportunity to be our friend, so we didn't really know.
Right.
And so I think when we start having those conversations, and when you put a human face on it, it's not about your sexuality, but it's also, we're not hiding anymore. So we're just going to, out to get our pizza, to mow the lawn, to do all the normal things. And when people start relating to us as your neighbor and not the gay with the agenda,
right,
then we can really start having better dialogue.
Yeah, that's really interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I saw that Labor Secretary Osborne was going to be speaking at the Log Cabin Republicans, and I was like, "This is," and I know her; she's a friend of the show, and a personal friend, and so I was talking to my wife about it, and she said, "I didn't know that group was still around," and I said, "I haven't seen anything either," and so you used the word reconstitute, and so that I wondered if it was that maybe perhaps at that time in history now where there are people involved who are saying, this is who we are, and it's okay to be here, and we need to maybe find a way to organize in a different way. So.
Yeah, well, and I think last year, there were a group of Republicans that wanted to get involved in Pride last year, and I think there were just some misconstrued wires, and this is a very polarizing time, and so members of the community didn't know what to think about that. They were scared, because you could come in saying, oh, we're going to be here to support you, and really it's a protest in the middle of the march. So I think just having those wires crossed and really trying to create a dialogue within the community, but also within our party, to finally work through this. And we may not be successful. I hope we will, and I think we will, because our generation is much different. And so eventually we're going to take party leadership nationally. And, one of our folks was a delegate at the RNC. And so just trying to work through that within the community, but also within the Republican Party.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been reading a book that's on the shelf there behind you, James, called Uncivil Agreement. I feel like we may have talked about it on the show here a couple of times, but it tracks the division in our country, right, between two parties, and how we self-sort in many ways, right, like ideologically, racially, about where we live, and how we live and shop and eat with people that are like us, and that often means that we don't interact with folks of other groups, and so that as we've done that more and more, we have sorted ourselves along multiple lines, right? So racial lines, socioeconomic lines, political ideological lines. And so you get areas like, well, people refer to the bubble here in Oklahoma City, right? And Tulsa's similar, where you get people that are younger, tend to be left-leaning, similar like socioeconomic levels, with the exception of like Mesta Park area, but people who are a pretty homogenous group, and that means that we don't allow ourselves or put ourselves into a place where we would crosscut with other groups, right? And so go back 60 years and you would have, northern black Republicans and southern white, Democratic women, and all these kind of groups that we just don't have as many of those cross-cutting interactions like we used to. And so what I've heard you both say is that you, at some point in your political experience, there's been I don't know if disconnect is the right word, but at least a barrier between that identity, right? So how you view yourself and the policies that you work on behalf of, right? So as a lobbyist for many of the causes that are commonly associated with Republicans, and as someone who, James is a Democrat who is advocating for causes like public transit and stuff that are typically or often aligned with kind of Democrats, it sounds like you both have had to face conversations that were like, wait, okay, this is fine, but who are you, and can I accept who you are before I accept policy? So I guess my question in that, and James, I'll go to you first. Do you feel like that that disconnect for some voters, and maybe for you, has gotten in the way of being able to do your job politically?
It's what I love about serving on city council and what I enjoyed about running as well. When I knocked doors, I would always, I'd have my campaign literature, I'd introduce myself, and I'd say, hi, I'm James Cooper, I'm running for city council. Our current council person is retiring. What are your concerns for your neighborhood and hopes for our city? And I'd shut up, which is hard for anyone who knows me to believe, but but I would just listen. And really rarely did I knocked Democrats, Independents, and Republican doors, and rarely did a Republican. I actually remember the three. I can count 3 Republicans. I knocked 4,000 doors, talked to 2,000 people, and I can, hand to God, only remember 3 of them who their response to my concerns and hopes were, what political party are you? And 2 of them were right after the Kavanaugh hearings. And I said, I'm a Democrat, but this is a nonpartisan election. Sidewalks don't have a party identification, which is always a nice little icebreaker. Except for these 2 guys are like, the way you all treated Kavanaugh was disgusting. I was like, I was knocking doors, sir. Like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Not in the Senate.
Yeah. And so that was rare. And then Democrats were much more likely to ask me that question. And as soon as I said that, or when they looked at the campaign literature and saw I was a teacher, it was just a done deal. But I wouldn't let it be a done deal. I was like, no, but seriously, I need to know what concerns you have in your neighborhood. And I need to know what the hopes are for the city. Otherwise, I won't know what I'm doing. Like, I won't know how to represent you in government. And they were like, what, really? I was like, yes, like, give me the work, So that was great. And, and then 4 years earlier, a Republican mayor, Cornett, had appointed me to our city's public transportation board. And through that, I was able to help get a Sunday bus service first time since 1964-65, the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act. And that was a Republican who appointed me to that. And Mayor Holt took a little walk with me and about 100 people the night before I took office. We walked from the site of the first gay-friendly bar that was across from Skirvin to City Hall. And he gave a speech on behalf of our community and on behalf of me. And I count him as a friend. And so I have some experience working with Republicans that jumbles, I think, a lot of the wires. It has not at all been an impediment to me doing my job. I am friends now with more Republicans than I think any Democrat would assume. But kind of to David's point, a lot of them are either younger or they're really not aligned with this contemporary Republican Party. They're really not. And if they are, they still understand that the work I'm wanting to do on behalf of our city benefits everybody. Stronger neighborhoods means, stronger people, healthier people in those neighborhoods means people can spend more money. And when they can spend more money at local shops and restaurants. That's more sales tax for us to improve police and fire and parks and public transport. So the Republicans here, a lot of them in our city get that. They understand that. I think for me, the hard part, the hardest part for me is a few weeks after I took office, I saw that the state Republican Party passed the party platform. I'm to understand, however, that a lot of the people that I know who are Republicans weren't there. Mm-hmm. And there were some other people who were, tend to be more evangelical Christian type people. Although I can tell you right now, one of my math teachers at Jefferson, she's an evangelical Christian. She and I, hand in glove, love each other, contributed to my campaign. She almost would have voted for Bernie, she told me. And she would have definitely voted for me if she didn't live in Norman. But I was really disappointed to see the state Republican Party platform say, we really don't like this whole gay teacher stuff. We don't want LGBT history taught in our schools. When we do that, when we ignore the fact that the guy during the American Revolution, who was right beside Washington, a lot of our soldiers were dying because they were using the bathroom really close to where they were sleeping.
Right.
And one of this, I can't remember his name for the life of me, forgive me, history, but this guy tells Washington, he's like, I have an idea. Why don't we move the trenches where we use the restroom further out from the camp? He saved lives, and that man was gay. The guy who organized the March on Washington, Bayard Rustin, gay. It is not separate history to talk about LGBT history. It is our history. It is American history. The fact that we would have anybody keep that history from us. The fact that, if this little Mayor Pete kid wins the presidency, he won't be the first openly LGBT president. That would go to James Buchanan. And even Andrew Jackson knew he was gay. The country knew he was gay. I was listening to this other podcast. I'm sorry, I do listen to other podcasts.
I do too, yeah.
It's called Presidential. Did you all listen to that? The Washington Post one came out during the 2016 election. It's amazing, about 20, 30 minutes per person. And Buchanan, I learned, was openly gay. Well, he was in relationships, right? And one of them, the relationship he was in was with the guy, a senator who would go on to name the city of Selma, Alabama. And Andrew Jackson had a nickname for Buchanan, called him Aunt Nancy. And so we already had this, but it's not in our history books. We don't teach it. And there is, unfortunately, at this moment in time, it's not to say that the Democrats have always been great. It took Barack Obama a couple tries to get there with same-sex marriage, Hillary Clinton too. But our party is completely right now aligned with the safety and security of LGBTQ people. And unfortunately, at this particular moment in time, too many Republicans, not all of them, like I said, David's a great friend. Mayor Cornett appointed me to this public transportation board, knowing I was openly LGBTQ. But right now, we have too many people who don't want that history taught, and it's one party that's doing that. And that's hurting our kids. That's hurting our kids. They don't see themselves reflected in textbooks. They don't see themselves reflected in the stories that make up America. And when you look at the suicide rates of LGBT kids, it's significantly higher. 1 in 3, 1 in 5. Contemplate, think about it. And it's easier to contemplate it when no one is there validating who you are. And instead you have people telling you, you are sick. And so I would like to see if David is successful in his endeavors in his party, more of bringing those statistics to those people and explaining, here's what's at stake. I would love to see more people like my math teacher, who I believe voted for Trump, but she put together an academic club there at Jefferson and asked them, you all do your own research project. And one of the kids they did a trans project. And there was Miss Gant just right there at their side, just learning with her. Mm-hmm. And I want to see more of that. But I worry that's not where a lot of the people are on the other side of the aisle. And it took my party a long time to get where we are. But we are here. Mm-hmm. We are here.
Sure. David, for you, doing lobbying, I mean, lobbying for HIV causes is one thing. There are a lot of other clients you guys have. Does your identity ever get in the way, or come in conflict? May not get in the way, but come in conflict with your work in politics?
Yeah, absolutely. Not with the other clients. that's not an issue really. I think with the HIV work, it's a very a lot of Republicans in the majority party were like, this makes sense. You know, we had an influx of educators, and so they're like, yeah, I've had to hear this or teach this, and it's awful. So they were very on board. But there were some rural Republicans who really had an issue. And, you know, I was sitting in a member's office, and we were talking about it, and he was like, yeah, I'm for this. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've got this rural Republican, doesn't even ask any questions. And then he immediately said, because people who choose to deny God's will need to understand the consequences. And I just had to sit there, you know. So I of course changed my seating to be a little more masculine at that point, and because I had a yes vote and I didn't want to mess that up.
Right.
So I was gutted on the inside that he said that and that he thought that, but I had to maintain my professional face. And I mean, I got his vote, but it wasn't for the right reason.
Right.
But I'm hopeful that it's all about education. I think if people continue, because this isn't a natural. Homophobia is not like just something you're born with. You learn it, you're taught it, you're on the playground and you hear someone use a derogatory term. So then you try to change the way you act, and then you call someone else that. And so by being out there and being more visible in our communities and being open about our sexualities or our gender identity or anything, then you're a relatable person to someone else. And, when I was first coming up through Republican groups and things, I was very, very terrified. And then I started looking, and there were a few people that were just older than I was, the generation above, and they were out. They were Republican staffers. Everyone knew. And so I looked at those people and I thought, well, if they have a job, then all I have to do is work hard. And so, I hope that somebody sees me that way, and somebody says, oh, I can be on the city council, or I can be the mayor, or I can do these things. And it takes people to not be hiding anymore. And I think we're at a place now where we've got a gay man running for president. When I was a kid, really the only LGBTQ representation was Will and Grace. And so, and that was just kind of it was very stereotypical. It's a funny show, but it still, portrays just what people want you to think.
Right.
And so now it's mainstream. And so I think it's just going to take time.
Yeah. If, David, for you, we started this show by talking about that this is the 50th anniversary of Stonewall. If you could imagine what Oklahoma might be like in another 50 years and how we relate to this issue, I'm asking you because I know that you are a measured guy. So in your opinion, where do you think we might be in another 50 years?
I don't know, but I'll say this. I'm very lucky to have been born when I was born. I remember, when I was first kind of coming to terms with my sexuality, I was 21, 22, and I still had it in my head, like, there's no way that I'm going to be able to get married. Like, there's a lot of progress, but it's not going to happen that quickly. I mean, it was just a handful of years later. And I was lucky enough, but to be in DC when the ruling came down.
Oh, wow.
Unfortunately, I was there and I wasn't out to my boss at the time. So I just stayed in Alexandria and just like cried on the patio.
Yeah.
But I mean, I remember being in DC, and it's actually, I was sitting in a room with Grover Norquist when it happened, of all places. But I just went outside, and to see the cars driving up and down the street with like pride flags it was incredible. So I think the next 50 years, I mean, I'm hopeful that things get better, but I will fully admit, like, I have a lot of privilege when it comes to this, because I grew up in a rural area, so I can really, I'm white, I'm a man, and I can come in and out of quote unquote masculinity, so I don't have to worry necessarily. I can change if I feel like I'm unsafe, but a lot of members of our community aren't that way. So I think I will have it, already do have it better than a lot of folks. And I think so in 50 years, I'll be fine. But we have to make sure that more marginalized parts of our community, whether it's the young people, people of color, trans folks, are brought with us. And so I'm hopeful in 50 years that we're all there together and we're celebrating Pride as an actual celebration and not still as a protest. I think we need to still look at Pride through a lens, through a protest lens. We're having fun. We're celebrating with our community. We've made tremendous work, but there's still a lot to do. And so if we kind of use that protest aspect, and I think the folks who are putting Pride together this year have done a really great job of kind of balancing that, celebrating our history and where we've come from, but also acknowledging we've got a lot of work to do, and we need to do it together.
Yeah, that was good. I like that, framing it that it is a celebration, but it also still needs to be a protest. That's really good. And I will say to our listeners, I extend an invitation. I didn't intend to have just three dudes on the podcast. I just didn't work out for some other for some women and for some transgender folks to be here. So we hope to do this again in the not too distant future with some additional voices that will add additional flavor to this conversation, I think, in a very important way. James, before we go, it is Pride. You've been involved in that aside from painting flags on the street. Can you give us like a brief rundown of what listeners could expect this weekend?
So be on the lookout for that Pride flag. Again, first time in our city's history that's there. There at the intersection of 39th and Barnes. And I believe there's festival stuff tonight. And then tomorrow is the parade at noon. And then the festival continues after that into the evening. So I would encourage everyone to, bike, walk, bus. Try not to drive, for the love of God. Too many cars out there anyway. So no, I think it's going to be a really good weekend. And then from, and to David's point, the people who've hosted Pride this year, Lauren and her crew are, they're incredible and they should be commended because they really broadened the conversation away from, wealthy, white, older men and brought more voices to it. And then I think, I can't tell you what the next 50 years are going to be, but I can tell you the next year, July 2020, the 39th Street District is scheduled to receive a street enhancement project.
Yeah.
This was something that Councilman Shadid, my predecessor, and I worked on with the businesses on 39th Street back in 2011, way before I thought about running for office, but when I was writing a 2-part LGBT history for the Gazette, a cover story at the time. And he and I spoke about a month or two later at a Republican fundraiser, if you can believe it. And I said to him, I was like, well, we can't change what's in people's hearts. We can't. But we can change their environment, and our kids need it. And I said, let's honor the history of the 39th Street District. And he's like, I think I understand what you're saying. Went over there, we created some bylaws, and with those businesses. Lo and behold, now that I am the first LGBTQ representative on council, I just so happen to be stepping up right as those street enhancements that those bylaws made possible. And that's going to be stakeholders there in the community. It's going to be the neighborhoods, the neighbors in those neighborhoods, the business owners coming together, and they're going to say, this is what we want. So be on the lookout, everybody, if you're out and about this weekend. The design consultant for the street enhancement project will be out there with about a handful of different designs for us to look at. I have not seen them yet.
Ooh.
I'm excited. One of the very first appointments I made as a board appointment was Tony Carfang, who a straight ally and a cyclist, rides his bike to work from Shepherd neighborhood to Boeing. Bless his heart. That's what we still say in Oklahoma, bless your heart. Mm-hmm. But he's working with them to make sure that area is walkable and bikeable, and it has the infrastructure that it needs to encourage private investment to step up. Isn't that fun to hear from a Democrat? Like that the government's role is to provide infrastructure and then let the private market take it from there.
See, we have more in common.
We have that in common. No, I think it's going to be a really exciting time. And if 50 years from now, the kids who were there today painting that flag have in their head that whether they are trans, non-binary, black, woman, whatever they may be, they remember that their council person and the director of Freedom Oklahoma and the director of youth LGBT groups here were out there working with them to create that better environment. They'll set the stage for what needs doing next.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you for sharing. James, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
David, thank you.
Thanks.
And that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks for tuning in. If you are listening to this before the end of the weekend, I encourage you to go out to, and you're in Oklahoma City or want to drive in, I encourage you to go check out Pride. It is a lot of fun, and it is an interesting a time as an ally, as a straight ally, it's a important time, I think, to reflect on our role in advocating for equal rights for everybody. So don't forget to rate and share the podcast with your friends. Next week, we're going to have an audio from our last West Wing Weekly podcast. Be a panel discussion with Steve Hill, Donnell Harder, and Phil Bacharach, and talking about their experience as the right-hand person to some of our elected leaders. So catch that. Scott and I will both be on vacation, and then we'll be back on July 5th with an actual live episode. Until then, have a great week.